Hi, my name is Beth Massey and welcome to the WPF Forms over Data video series. Today I'm going to show you how to create a list that displays data from our database using Windows Presentation Foundation, also known as WPF. WPF is a next-generation presentation system for building Windows client applications. In this video, we'll build a list that displays product data from our database. So I've got Visual Studio open and I'm going to create a new WPF application. So I'm going to go File, New Project, and select WPF application. And we'll call this Listbox Data WPF. Okay, so next we're going to connect to a database. I'm going to use the OMS database that we created in previous videos. If you followed the Forms over Data video series for WinForms, we created this database back then. So this database is really simple. It just has customer, order detail, orders, and product. And what I want to do is I want to display a list of products in a list box on this form. So the first thing I'm going to do is get some data into our project. Going to the data menu, I'll add a new data source. I'll select database, and we're going to go ahead and select our OMS database. I'm just going to select the product table here. I'll name this product. Okay, great. So now what I need to do is load up our data table. So I'm just going to go ahead and double click here, and in our Windows loaded event we're just going to go ahead and fill our data table up with data. So I'm going to need a couple fields here. I'll call this, for our table adapter, TA product. Okay, and I'll create an instance here of our data set. Okay, so now I can go ahead and fill this. Okay, so that fills our products with product table with the list of products in our database. So now I'm going to go back over to our form here, and we can start designing the form. It's pretty simple. I'm just going to go into our toolbox, and we're just going to put all this data into a list box. Okay, we can just go ahead and stick that there. Now there's a couple ways we can code this to populate the list box with our list of products. So the first way we can do this is in code. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our code behind here, and I'm just going to set the list box item source equal to me.dsProduct.products. That's the product table. Now when we do that, it'll just list basically the data rows here that are inside of our product table. We should specify to the list box what we want to display on the row, what column we want to display. And we can do that by saying listbox1 dot display member path can be name. Okay, so let's just go ahead and hit F5 and run this so we can see what it looks like. Okay, so there we go. Here's our list box, and here's all the items inside. You notice they're out of order. We didn't specify a where or an order by clause on our table adapter fill method. But what we could do is we could sort this here quickly on the client. We could just specify a link query. Okay. So I'm just going ahead and sorting this on the client. So it's taking this type data table, and from all the rows inside of that type data table, just order by the name column. Okay, so now what if we wanted to do this a different way? What if we wanted to go ahead and put maybe like a text box below the list box to indicate the description, for instance? So as we chose items in the list box, we get the description in the text box at the bottom. So let's go ahead and go back to our form. Since I made changes to the code, we'll just refresh it. And underneath here, I'm going to stick a text box. And I want the text box to display the description of that product when I select the product in the list box up here. Okay, so we need to bind both of these controls to the data table. And an easier way to go about doing the data binding to multiple controls in WPF is by setting what's called the data context. So what I want to do is set the data context of the window so that the controls can work with that default data context. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the form here, and we're going to make a couple code changes. So the first change I'm going to make is, instead of setting the item source specifically to our data source here, I'm going to set the Windows data context instead. Okay, now what I want to do is I'm going to set the list box properties in the XAML instead. So let's go back over to the XAML, and let's get some of this out of the way. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to specify the item source here in XAML. Since we've specified the data context of the window as the data table, there's a special syntax we can use for the item source binding. So items source equals binding path equal to, and it's sort of like empty. Okay, so that just means that the path is at its root, which we've specified the data context as the data table, so this will pick up that whole data table as the item source. The other thing we need to do is specify the display member path, which we were doing in code, but now we want to do here in the XAML, and that is the field called name. Now we can go ahead and set the text box property as well, and the text box property we want to set is text, but we want to bind this as well to the column called description on our product. So the syntax for that is very similar to before. Binding path equal to description. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this and see what it looks like. Okay, great. So it looks like we've got our in order here, because our link query is specifying the order by. In order, our data source is being displayed in the list box, and you'll notice that the text box here has the description. However, as I scroll through the items or click on the items in the list box, the bottom isn't changing. Okay, the description isn't updating, and that's probably what we're going to want. So let's close this. There's a very easy property to set on the list box in order to get this to do what we want. And the property is called is synchronized with current item. And we specify this as true. So when we do that, when we select an item in the data source in the list box here, the current position of the data source will move. And now you can see, there you go, that the description is updating in our text box below. So that's how easy it is to get data from our database into a list box in our WPF forms. But the really cool thing about WPF is that we can create a template for our list box that can be any set of controls. Have you ever wanted to have a multi-column text box in WinForms, for instance? Well, that's a really easy thing to do in WPF. So let's go ahead and create an item template for our list box that goes ahead and displays both the description and the name directly in the box. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just remove our text box, because what I want to do is actually display this all inside of the list box itself. Okay, so what we're going to do is create what's called an item template. So the easiest way to do that is I'm going to just close off the tag here for the list box. Okay, and inside we're going to specify an item template. Now we don't want to specify the display member path name anymore, because what we're going to do is we're going to create controls inside of this list box. So in order to easily stack the controls, I'm going to use what's called a stack panel. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up this list box. You see here, item template. Okay, and the type of template we're going to create is called a data template, because we're bound to the data. Okay, so in order to line up the controls really easily, I mentioned I'm going to create a stack panel. Okay, so let's just create a stack panel. And the default orientation for a stack panel is actually vertical, but to make this look like columns, because I'm going to put two labels inside of the stack panel, is I want them to be, or the orientation I want to be horizontal. So we just set orientation equal to horizontal. Okay, Great. Now I can go ahead and stick a couple labels in here. Okay. So first label, let's go ahead and make the content equal to, and this is where we specify our data binding. So just like we've been doing, binding path equal to name. Okay, so now we can go ahead and just set another label, and we can make that label equal to description. Now since the description is a little bit wider, I'm going to make the width of this label equal to 100, and the width of this one 200. Okay. Great, so now let's go ahead and run this. So now you can go ahead and see there's two columns in our list box. Okay, so that's how easy it is to create a multi-column list box. And in fact, you can put any controls inside of your Edim templates here. So you could create text boxes, buttons, check boxes. You can even edit the data. The list view and the list box are pretty fundamental to WPF. You can do a lot of amazing things with list controls. So I hope I've made it sound as easy as it really is to create a list box that's bound to data inside of your database. So I'd like to thank you for your time. If you'd like to check out more videos, you can check MSDN Developer Centers, or for more information on WPF and WinForms, check out windowsclient.net. Thanks again.